Alarming news is coming from New Delhi. According to Indian and international media, the country, which until recently was considered one of the key partners of the United States in Asia, has finally turned toward China. The Financial Times, citing senior sources in the Indian Ministry of Finance, reported that Narendra Modi's government has made an unprecedented decision to begin a gradual withdrawal from American government bonds and to shift national reserves into gold and yuan. For Washington, this sounds like a bolt from the blue, since India had long been seen as a counterbalance to Chinese influence, especially against the backdrop of the trade war launched by Donald Trump against Beijing. But now it seems the White House itself has provoked a tectonic shift whose consequences may prove far more serious than any tariff barriers. According to Bloomberg, India's decision was the result of a sharp escalation between Trump and Modi in recent months. The White House imposed new tariffs on steel, textiles, and pharmaceutical products from India, and also restricted access for Indian IT companies to the American market. In New Delhi, this was seen not merely as economic pressure, but as an insult to national sovereignty. As The Hindu noted, in closed-door talks, the Prime Minister of India said that the country cannot afford to be held hostage to the whims of American policy and must seek new pillars of support. Ironically, that pillar turned out to be China, which only a few years ago was considered India's main competitor in the region. But Beijing acted subtly. It offered investments in infrastructure, access to cheap technologies, and the possibility of settling accounts in national currencies bypassing the dollar. For India, whose rapidly growing economy constantly hungers for capital, this proved an extremely attractive proposition. According to Nikkei Asia, it was right after the visit of a Chinese delegation to New Delhi that a document was prepared outlining the gradual de-dollarization of Indian reserves. It contains a direct indication that in the next 5 years, India plans to reduce the share of American government bonds almost to zero, replacing them with gold, yuan, and even BRICS digital currencies. Economists point out that in terms of holdings of US government debt, India is not comparable to China or Japan, but the very fact of such a decision carries symbolic weight and could trigger a domino effect. If other countries affected by American tariffs follow India's lead, Washington may face a crisis of confidence in its bonds. In the corridors of Congress, anxious voices are already being heard. As the Wall Street Journal writes, American senators fear that the Indian move will become a signal for Southeast Asian and African countries, which have long been considering switching to alternative settlement systems. Against this backdrop, Donald Trump's reaction turned out to be contradictory. On his Truth Social account, he called Modi's actions ingratitude and threatened tough measures against Indian goods. But as analysts from the Carnegie Endowment note, the White House is well aware that increasing pressure could finally push India away and firmly anchor it within China's orbit. Paradoxically, the very trade war designed as a tool to strengthen America is today turning into a weapon against itself. Moreover, according to Kyoto News, Beijing is actively discussing plans to create a joint Chinese-Indian investment fund to finance energy and transport projects. If these plans are implemented, the balance of power in Asia will change irreversibly. The United States will lose a crucial ally, while China will gain a new strategic partner. Western diplomats in private conversations already admit that Washington has found itself in a situation where it has practically no levers of pressure left on New Delhi. Military contacts are frozen, trade talks have collapsed, and key Indian corporations are opening offices in Shanghai and Hong Kong instead of New York. All this is happening against the backdrop of unprecedented tensions in the global economy. After all, India's rejection of the dollar is not just the step of one country. This is a symbolic blow to the very foundation of the American financial system, which for decades has rested on the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency. Now, according to one Goldman Sachs analyst, for the first time in half a century, there is a real risk that the dollar could lose its undisputed dominance. The only question is whether Trump will be able to reverse this trend or whether history has already taken a course that cannot be changed. Interestingly, in China, India's decision was perceived not only as a diplomatic victory, but also as a strategic opportunity to finally seize the initiative from the United States in the global economy. The Global Times writes outright that India has chosen a multipolar world and refused to be Washington's vassal. Chinese officials openly admit they see in these developments confirmation of a long-term trend. The dollar is gradually losing trust, while the yuan, backed by gold reserves and trade agreements within BRICS, is becoming a new instrument of global trade. At the same time, Beijing is launching talks with Saudi Arabia on selling oil in yuan, with India as an intermediary. If this project takes off, the United States will face a threat to the petrodollar system, which for decades has been the cornerstone of American influence. Against this backdrop, Europe is taking a cautious but increasingly uneasy stance. Brussels acknowledges that Washington is losing control over key economic hubs and fears that India will now use its rapprochement with China to pressure the EU, demanding preferences and investments. German industrial corporations are already lining up for access to the Indian market, hoping not to miss the moment. But this only deepens cracks in the transatlantic alliance. Inside Washington, panic is spreading. Politico reports that the Pentagon is discussing not only economic measures, but also the possibility of expanding military cooperation with Japan and Australia to offset the loss of India. Yet the military themselves admit that New Delhi's geopolitical weight is too great to be simply replaced by other allies. Meanwhile, divisions are widening in Congress. Some Republicans are urging Trump to punish India and show toughness, while Democrats propose making concessions to restore trust. But Trump, it seems, has no intention of backing down. His rhetoric is becoming more aggressive, and trade threats multiply by the day. The Indian press, on the other hand, is portraying events as a national triumph. The Times of India calls the decision to abandon American debt a liberation from financial shackles, while NDTV broadcasts clips of Modi declaring that for the first time in history, India can dictate its own terms to the global economy. According to insiders close to the Prime Minister's office, New Delhi is already preparing legislation to stimulate the domestic gold market and introduce new rules for trade settlements in the national currency. In Washington, this is seen as the beginning of a large-scale de-dollarization process that may prove irreversible. A Brookings Institution analyst told CNN, "America has long assumed that such steps were possible only in theory. But now, the world's largest democracy is showing it is ready to abandon the dollar. And this could set an example for dozens of other countries." Thus, what we are witnessing is no longer just a trade war or the political ambitions of Trump and Modi, but a global turning point in the entire financial architecture of the world. Russia, for its part, has already stated through RYA Novosti that it is ready to support India's move and propose an expansion of joint settlements in rubles, yuan, and rupees, further strengthening the BRICS bloc. The Arab monarchies, according to Al Jazeera, are closely watching developments, and sources claim that Saudi Arabia may accelerate negotiations on trading oil outside the dollar if it sees that India and China withstand Washington's pressure.